The only thing I'll tell you before I open it up to questions is that the film I wanted to make was going to be called A Light in His Eyes, and it was going to be just about my mother and my brother. I didn't want to go near my father's story because it was way too painful. And I think, the one thing that's come out of this film that that in the emails and messages that I've gotten on the website and on the Facebook page is that what people seem to relate to with this film is that every family has a story. They may relate to my mother, and they may relate to my brother, but everybody seems to relate to the fact that all of us in this room and everybody out there in New Milford and beyond and all around the world have a story, and usually their family story isn't one that's particularly pleasant, and there's usually literally a skeleton in the closet or something else that's very painful and has had an impact on either your parents or your brother or your sister, or you had someone live with you that went through something that affected you, whatever it was. And so I didn't want to go near that. And I thought I could tell the story of my brother and my father in sort of a nice kind of antiseptic way, this lovely, or the story of my mother and my brother, leave my father out of it and just sort of talk about a mother's love, a boy's journey from darkness to light. And, yesterday when he was first came into the world, he was in a very dark place. Now he's not anymore, and it's all because of my mom, and isn't that great? And, and you could have made a film like that. What happened was, in 2008, after I'd had some tumult in my life, and my marriage blew up, and I got a phone call one day from my ex-wife, who said, "Come over to the garage and get all your crap out of the garage." And so I went over to the house, and I spent about an hour pulling boxes out of the garage. And one of the boxes I pulled out was full of reels of film. And I remembered, it wasn't like I had lost it. This was stuff that I had gotten from my dad when he died in 1979. And I knew exactly what it was when I opened up the box. It was these reels of film that had been taken by his father back in the late 20s and early 30s. And back in the dark ages, when I was a little bit younger than you, there was obviously no videotape, no DVDs, no that kind of stuff. If you wanted to see films of your parents when they were kids, you literally went down to the basement, and there was a film projector and a screen that came down like the one last night, except much smaller. And you watched these old films that were fed into the projector, and that's how you viewed movies back then, and home movies in particular. And so what I did was I got all this stuff back home. I sent it out to a place somewhere in Wyoming where they do digital transfers of film to digital medium, which in my case I wanted mini DV tapes. And I got them back. I got 7 mini DV tapes back within a week. And I literally got them back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I sat down and started logging the tapes, number 1 through number 7, literally logging every scene and every tape. And I literally worked through the night, and by the time the sun came up the next morning, I knew that I had to tell a different story than the one I had initially set out to tell, which was going to be, I knew that I had to get my grandfather involved. I knew I had to get my father involved. I knew I had to get me involved in some way because I was trying to make sense out of my life then, and still am to some degree. And in order for it all to make sense to me anyway, I had to sort of fit me, my father, his father, and my brother all into the mix. And so the challenge for me was to try and figure out how to put all those pieces together, because it's a very fair observation to make of those who've seen the film that there's a couple of different stories going on. The film starts out, you think it's going in one direction, then it goes in another, and then it kind of comes to the end, and you kind of get it, all the pieces get connected. So that's basically it. And then of course the last thing I'll tell you before I open it up to questions is that obviously I couldn't call the film that I was going to now make Light in His Eyes. And the reason for that title was just because that was what my mother saw in my brother always, even when she was being told that there was nothing there was nothing going on. So I knew I had to have a different title, and then the title that evolved was the one that seemed to make the most sense to me. And I thought, actually my girlfriend was the one that came up with that, and it was perfect because it seemed to me to embody a lot of the. I thought it was a title that people would look at and say, "Gee, what does that mean? Dad's in heaven with Nixon." And again, you're not old enough to remember Richard Nixon, But he was a very, back when I was at Canterbury in the late 60s, well, no, mid-60s until 1970, Nixon became president, I guess, in 1968. Is that right? And was a reviled, I mean, you either loved the guy or hated him. He was an absolutely very, very a figure in American history that you either loved or hated. And of course, there was, I'm sure you have or will study Watergate and all of that. But he was kind of a Shakespearean character. And my father just, I mean, literally had a physical reaction when the guy's name was mentioned. He watched him on TV, and he literally turned purple. I mean, it was like watching the Hulk transform from a normal guy into the Hulk. And so I just thought, you've got elements of politics, religion, and heaven, Nixon, dad, family. It all kind of seemed to make sense. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking, and any questions you have about the film, about the making of the film, about the process, feel free to ask away, and I'll answer any questions you have. No. Chris had two jobs, as you'll recall from the film. On Mondays and Tuesdays, he was working at Yale New Haven, and on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, he works at Edge of the Woods, which is a health food store, grocery store, I guess, in New Haven. And he had, I guess, a pretty relatively fun job at the hospital, stacking folding sheets and towels and that kind of stuff. And then for whatever reason, he was relegated to sweeping floors, which he didn't like. And so he went to my mom and said, I really don't want to do this. And she said, and he'd already dropped one day to stay at home and paint. And he wasn't. It was a volunteer job, so there was no real reason for him to stay on and do something he didn't enjoy doing if he could spend that extra day painting, doing his artwork. So now he works at home painting on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then goes to Edge of the Woods on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and that's something he really enjoys. I mean, he loves that job, and they love him, and he's been there since 1981, I think, and so he's sort of become a mainstay at that store. Yeah.
Is your mother still living?
Yes.
How that was affecting?
Yeah, she's still around. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, did Chris see the movie, and what was his reaction to it?
He saw the movie. I don't know that, I mean, you probably saw in the film, Chris is not someone you can sit down and sort of have a conversation with the way I would with any of you. He doesn't process that way. He's also someone who, when you're talking to him, I think wants to give an answer that he never wants to disappoint by any answer he gives, because I think he feels sometimes that even though he's not being tested, he feels sometimes that he is being tested, and he has to give, quote unquote, the right answer. So as far as the film goes, I think he enjoyed the film when he was on camera, and when he was in the film, and when his artwork was being shown, because he loves people to see his artwork. If he were with me today, he wouldn't really be able to answer any questions in the way that we all are accustomed to. But he walks around with in his jacket pocket, he keeps a stack of photographs, these dog-eared photographs of his artwork. And it's, he would literally take those out to anyone who came near him and say, do you want to see my pictures? And you'd be there for 20 minutes, he'd go through each one, and he'd tell you when he painted it and why he painted it, and that's sort of what he does. But the short answer to the question is that I think he liked the film, but if you asked him what it was about, if you asked him, what the message was, you're not going to get that from him. They go for anywhere, depending on the size. I mean, for a long time, he was doing these massive paintings that were, literally, that size or even bigger. The one of New York Harbor that was in the film that Tom Eisenberg, the collector, bought was about, God, I think it was 8 by 6 or something. He just continued to, he put all these pieces of paper together and scotch taped them together, and then did this massive painting. I think that one went, 10 years ago or something, or maybe 12 years ago for maybe $5,000. But most of his paintings, and now he's being asked, his agent's trying to get him to downsize and do only smaller size paintings. And those generally go from, I'm going down to the Outsider Art Fair tonight in New York where he's got 7 paintings. I'll be curious to see what they go for. But depending on the size, usually anywhere between $750 and $2,500. And, some might go $3,000, some might go $5,000, but I'd be surprised if they go that high. That's a really good question. The thing that was weird about that is that, the whole time I was at Canterbury, when I turned 14, I don't know whether this still exists, but in New York where I lived, you couldn't work until you turned 14 and you got what was known as working papers. And as soon as I turned 14, which was the fall of, I guess it was 60s. Yeah, so after my freshman year at Canterbury, I started working on Wall Street during the summers at a variety of different jobs every summer, just because he was there, and because that allowed me to stay in the city with my father and hang out with him. Everybody else was out in Southampton, during the week. And I had no desire to be out there. If I could rewrite my life, you idiot, you're 14 years old, these are the best years of your life, you're spending them in New York, working on Wall Street, why not go out there and, teach tennis or surfing or whatever. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wanted to be with my dad. And I don't know, I think if I had thought the whole thing through, and there was maybe I would have stayed on Wall Street, but I had no interest in staying down there and having that life if he wasn't going to be part of it. And I had this fantasy that we were going to be in business together at some point. And at the moment that was really supposed to happen in my mind, which was after graduating from BC and going back to Wall Street for what I thought was going to be the first, big job of my life, he walked up to me on the floor of the stock exchange in July of 1970 and said, I'm getting out of Wall Street, I'm selling my seat, I'm going to sell real estate. And as soon as I heard that, it was like, literally the afternoon after I found out about my dad's decision, I went home, to the apartment where I was still living, and I called up Ed Down, and I said, I have to come in and talk to you. And I went in and saw him the next day, and I said, look, there's been a major change in my life. My father's not going to be on Wall Street anymore. I don't want to be there anymore. Can you give me my brother's job? I'll work for free. I can get his job. It was perfect. It was, September was coming up. He was leaving and going to school, and I could slide right into his job. And he said, of course, and I'm going to pay you something. And I think, I started me off at some pittance. But that sort of got me going on my journalistic career. And I never thought of money. I didn't, I don't know that I processed what a horror show it was at the time. I think I just sort of was, I think I felt a tremendous responsibility to sort of, and I knew my father was beginning to kind of not only lose his money, but also beginning to lose his grip on everything. And I think as the oldest brother, I felt this responsibility to try and take care of everybody, which of course is maybe a normal reaction, but it's not what you're supposed to do in that situation. You got to take care of yourself. And, but to answer your question, I don't know that the idea of going out and saying I now I have to go out and make $1 million. No, it wasn't like that at all. And I think part of the process of making this film for me was believing and learning and understanding that even though there's been challenges in my life and certainly financial challenges. To believe that I'm not my father, and I'm not going to have the same kind of experience that he did, because that can mark you. That you go through something like that as a kid or as a young man. In my case, you can sort of you can allow that to kind of affect you in a very profound way. And I think I'm still, to some degree, I'm still processing that. Yes, sir.
Not only do you tell a very complex story of your family, but you choose a very complex way of telling it. Documentary filmmaking involves a lot of decisions. You're talking about what still pictures to use, what film to use, what music to use, who you're going to interview, all those things. Did your background in television and sports reporting help you choose that way of telling the story, or?
The whole time that I worked, I worked in 3 markets as a sportscaster. The first one was Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The next one was Dallas, Texas, and then Los Angeles. And in every one of those places that I worked, the one thing that I always did, and it was because of my background in print and my background, at Canterbury as someone who really liked to read and really liked to write and who learned, from Bill Dalton and people like that here. And then went to BC and majored in English. And even though, I was working on Wall Street during the summer, I always, I was an English major at BC. They didn't have communications or media back then, so I was an English major. And then, I always wrote. And then working with Dick Schaap, as my first boss at my first big job, I always wrote and learned how to, sort of the craft. He always said writing isn't an art, it's a craft, and it can be learned. And so I always wrote and always wrote my own stuff. And then once I got into the television business, which was completely unplanned, I didn't plan that at all. I kind of slopped into that in a very kind of backdoor way. And once I started doing that, I always did stories, and I always did features, and I always tried to do features on athletes because I was doing sports most of the time, but I always tried to do features that were more personality and kind of feature oriented, not, here's why Joe Blow has a 350 batting average. It was more like, he's he had to overcome this obstacle, or he's had this challenge in his life. There was always kind of the put the story on that side, and so I always did that. And so in 2001. And I'd had the film in my head for a long time. When my on-camera career began to wind down, because of the changes in the business, the economics and the people they were choosing to put on the air and the newscasts themselves, I had to kind of reinvent myself. And what I started to do back in 2001, I had a friend of mine who was an executive at Court TV, which was the predecessor to what is now True TV. So to answer your question, I had experience. I had an ability and a desire to tell stories when I was a sportscaster. I kind of amplified that into bigger stories when I was doing the work for Court TV. So that by the time the time came to sort of put the film together, I knew how to do it. I knew how to, a beginning, a middle, and end. I knew how to sort of construct a long story like that. In this case, a 90-minute film. In fact, my life. It was. Well, look, this was a remarkable experience for me because I, was away from home for the first time. Obviously, I think I had some of the most remarkable teachers that I've ever had in my life. A lot of them, unfortunately, are no longer with us. But I mean, I had teachers who were, in my view, far superior to the ones that I had at BC, far more memorable. I think my experience here, because I was not a good student, I really wasn't. I was a fair to middling student, but I learned how to be resilient here. I learned how to sort of develop that outer shell that you need to develop to sort of get yourself through life and understand that life isn't fair all the time, and there's things you have to do to kind of survive. And the story I told last night about having my grades read to me out loud in the North House, Duffy House now, common room. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, where you've got this book that's literally this thick, and there's pages going back and forth, and but you have a lot of experiences like that, and I think it was really. When you're away from home, you're bonding with a bunch of kids that you're all kind of thrown together, and it's sort of sink or swim in some way. And I was very lucky because I was a pretty good athlete, and I was, I could get along with different people, and I was adaptable. But it was, stuff happened back then that would never happen now because we live in a different world. I mean, but the thing is, I really relished the, I told the teachers last night before the film, there was in my math, I was a horrible math student. I mean, almost as bad in math as I was in Latin. But my teacher all 4 years here at Canterbury was a guy named Walter Burke, who was just, I loved him. He was just one of the greatest guys in the world. And I was, I think 2 weeks into my first class at Canterbury freshman year with Peter O'Donnell and Steve Cunningham, Mr. Burke said, okay, Murray, O'Donnell, and Cunningham, you three are in the dummy row. I want you in the back of the room. and some kids would be crushed by that. I relished it. I really did, because I loved him, and I knew he was. I knew he was going to get me through it. And even if and literally getting erasers and pieces of chalk thrown at my head, 2 or 3 times a week, it was okay, because I knew he liked me. I knew he knew I was working hard. And I knew that I was going to get through it somehow. As long as I kept working hard, and as long as I sort of had a sense of humor about the whole thing, I'd get through it. And I think that's what I learned here very early in my life, which is, that you have to be resilient, you have to be able to get along, and you have to be adaptable. And then the bonus was that I had. I mean, there's some teachers that are still here. I mean, Mr. Shea. Jules Villot, who was here last night, who I never had because I was too scared to take French. I took Spanish. With Jean Hebert, who I understand is in a home right down the street. Mr. Burke, John Martiska, I was his proctor at Havelmeyer, and then I was also in Carmody with Mr. Shea. A remarkable group. Bill Dalton, the English teacher, the guy was a genius. I learned how to write. I first learned how to write from Mr. Dalton, doing essays. Go do it. Write an essay tonight on that tree outside. I had remarkable experiences here with teachers that far exceeded the ones that I had at BC, because it was a much less personal experience. Here there were, I don't know how many kids were here in 1966 to 70, maybe less than 200 probably. I don't know, but it was a very intimate, special experience that shaped my life, no question. Well, not to sound pretentious, but I think there are a couple of messages. I think the obvious message is, that love can perform miracles. That's certainly one message, because my mother absolutely, for no reason other than the fact that she believed blindly and loved Christopher unconditionally. She believed that he was destined for something different than what the experts were telling her. So certainly love and the power of love is certainly one of the messages. But I also think that one of the important messages for me anyway that I hope came across was that I think, and you're too young, I think, and I hope you're not as impacted by this as most of us are as we get older in life. But there's a tendency, once you get on in life, to spend a lot of time worrying about a lot of stuff that you have no control over. And it's really not that important. You start to think about, whether you are making enough money. You start thinking about whether you are with the right person. You start thinking about whether your house is big enough. You start thinking about, is the grass greener on the other side of the fence syndrome that a lot of people grapple with as they get on in life. And I think, as I said in the film, I spent, my entire adolescence into my mid-20s basically trying to fix my father, which I couldn't do, and I wasn't supposed to do. I was trying to do that, but I couldn't do it. And you're not supposed to do that in life. You can love them, you can do as much as you can, but you can't fix anybody. And, I think I spent a lot of time in my life trying to protect my brother from being picked on, from being taunted, from being abused in any way, physically or emotionally, by kids who didn't understand him or didn't get him or bullied him. And I was very protective of him. And what's happened now is that Christopher is really leading a life right now that I aspire to. Now, you got the caveat there is that, his condition shuts off a lot of the stuff that I deal with on a daily basis, and most adults deal with on a daily basis, which is, how are you going to pay your bills? Are you with the woman you truly love? Are you in the city you want to be? Are you doing exactly what you want to do with your life? All that stuff Christopher doesn't process. And so, in some ways, I mean, he's leading a life right now that's very happy. You know, he's doing what he loves to do. He's painting. He's living in a place that he loves. He's living in an apartment that he loves. He gets great pleasure out of going to, you know, Stop and Shop and getting food, making waffles for his big brother. So, you know, I think the message there is, one of the messages there is that, you know, is that life is a gift. It's a blessing, and you know, you have to make of it what you will every day, and that, you know, we're spending a lot of time thinking about what you could be doing or you think you should be doing is just wasteful, and it's futile, and it's not going to get you anywhere. And that, you know, the best thing to do is to try and just be happy every day that you have, and you know, you make changes slowly and gradually, but the really important stuff is the stuff that, you know, is what my brother really stands for, which is, you know, he has no idea what his paintings sell for. He has no idea who Gloria Vanderbilt is, who discovered him, basically. He could care less. Not in a bad way. He's more focused on other things. And that's, I think, the main message of the film. So, thank you.